Captain Lee Hyun stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable, watching Earth grow smaller through the massive viewing screen. The blue marble that had been humanity's home for millions of years was now just a dot among the stars. His hands gripped the metal railing as he tried to push down the fear that clawed at his chest. "Captain, we're receiving the final transmission from Fleet Command," said Lieutenant Kim Tae from his position at the communications station. The young officer's voice was steady, but Lee could see the tension in his shoulders. Lee walked over to Kim's station. "Put it through to my ready room. I'll take it there." The captain's ready room was small and cramped like everything else on a military ship. Lee sat down at his desk and activated the secure channel. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen, looking older than his 60 years. The lines around his eyes were deeper now, carved by months of losing battles. "Lee, I won't waste time with pleasantries," the admiral said. "The evacuation fleet needs more time. The last transport ships are still loading civilians. We estimate another 18 hours before they can jump to hyperspace." Lee nodded. He had expected this. "How many ships do I have for escort duty?" The admiral's face grew grim. "That's just it, Lee. There are no other ships. The Indomitable is all we have left." The words hit Lee like a physical blow. One ship against the entire Vorthak Armada. It was impossible. "Sir, my ship is powerful, but against 200 enemy vessels or—" "I know what I'm asking, Captain. The evacuation fleet will jump to the Proxima system. Once they're safe, humanity can rebuild. But someone needs to buy them those 18 hours. Lee stared at the screen, understanding flooding through him. "This is a one-way mission. Your fuel tanks are full. You have enough to reach the edge of the solar system and engage the enemy. But there won't be enough left to return to Earth." The silence stretched between them. Lee thought about his crew of 300 men and women. They had families, dreams, futures they wanted to live. Now he was being asked to take all of that away from them. "Will you accept the mission, Captain?" Lee straightened his shoulders. "Yes, sir. The Indomitable will hold the line." Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "Lee, what you're about to do—" "History will remember it forever. Your sacrifice will give humanity a future." "Understood, sir. We'll make it count." The transmission ended, leaving Lee alone in the quiet room. He sat there for several minutes, trying to find the courage to face his crew. Finally, he stood up and walked back to the bridge. Commander Park Mina looked up as he entered. She was his tactical officer, brilliant and calm under pressure. "Orders, Captain. All senior staff to the briefing room now." 10 minutes later, Lee faced his department heads around the conference table. Chief Engineer Choi Bin sat at his left, his weathered hands folded on the table. Dr. Song Hai was across from him, her medical bag never far from her side. The others filled the remaining seats, all looking at him with expectation. "I'll be direct," Lee began. "Fleet Command has given us a mission. The Vorthak Armada will reach Earth in 16 hours. We're being ordered to intercept them and buy time for the evacuation fleet." "How many ships are going with us?" asked Park. "None. We're alone." The room fell silent. Choi slowly shook his head. "Captain, even with our upgrades, we can't fight 200 ships." "I know. But we can hurt them. We can make them think twice about pushing forward. And every minute we keep them busy is another minute for the transports to escape." Dr. Song leaned forward. "What aren't you telling us, Lee?" He met her eyes. Song had known him for 10 years. She could read him better than most. "We have fuel to reach the battle zone. We don't have fuel to come back." The silence was heavier this time. Kim, the youngest of them at 23, spoke first. "So we're gonna die out there." "Yes," Lee said simply. "That's what it means." Park stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need to think about this." She walked to the window and stared out at the stars. "My sister is on one of those transport ships." "We all have people we're leaving behind," said Choi quietly. "But if we don't do this, the Vorthak will catch the evacuation fleet. Everyone dies anyway." "At least this way some of us survive," added Dr. Song. "Humanity survives." Lee looked around the table. "I'm not ordering anyone to stay. This has to be a choice. Anyone who wants to transfer to the evacuation fleet can do so. No questions asked, no shame in it." Park turned back from the window. "How long do we have to decide?" 1 hour. After that, we need to inform the crew and begin preparations." The meeting broke up slowly. Lee remained in the briefing room as his officers filed out. Only Dr. Song stayed behind. "You're scared," she said. It wasn't a question. "Terrified," Lee admitted. "I've been in combat for 20 years, but I've never led 300 people to certain death." "You're not leading them to death, Lee. You're leading them to meaning. There's a difference. An hour later, Lee stood before his entire crew in the main hangar bay. 300 faces looked back at him, young and old, experienced veterans and fresh recruits. He could see fear in their eyes, but also determination. "You've all heard the rumors by now," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's intercom system. "They're true. We've been given a mission that we won't be coming back from." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Lee continued. "The Vorthak Armada is coming. If they reach Earth before the evacuation is complete, millions of innocent people will die. We're the only thing standing between the enemy and our families." He paused, looking out over the sea of faces. "I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered 200 to 1. The odds of survival are 0. But the odds of making a difference, of saving our people, those odds are good if we work together." A voice called out from the crowd. "What if we don't want to go?" "Then you don't go," Lee replied. "Transfer shuttles are standing by. Anyone who chooses to leave will be taken to the evacuation fleet. No one will think less of you." The hangar fell silent. Lee waited, watching as crew members looked at each other, making the hardest decision of their lives. Finally, Chief Petty Officer Yoon raised his hand. "Captain, I've got a question." "Yes, Chief?" "When do we launch? Because the sooner we get out there, the sooner we can start making those alien bastards pay." A cheer erupted from the crew. Lee felt his throat tighten with emotion as he realized that not a single person was walking toward the transfer shuttles. "All right then," he said once the noise died down. "Let's show the galaxy what humans are made of. All departments prepare for immediate departure. We launch in 2 hours." As the crew dispersed to their stations, Lee felt a hand on his shoulder. Park stood beside him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "For what it's worth, Captain, I can't think of anyone I'd rather die beside." "Let's focus on taking as many of them with us as possible," Lee replied. 2 hours later, the Indomitable's engines roared to life, pushing the massive ship away from Earth's orbital defense grid. Behind them, the evacuation fleet continued loading the last refugees. Ahead of them, somewhere in the darkness between the stars, an alien armada approached with the intention of destroying everything humanity had ever built. But Captain Lee Hyun and his crew were ready for them. The Indomitable raced through space toward the outer edge of the solar system, where long-range sensors had detected the first Vorthak scout ships. Captain Lee Hyun stood on the bridge watching the tactical display as Commander Park Mina worked at her station. "Enemy contact in 40 minutes, Park announced. "I'm reading 30 ships in the advance fleet. They're moving in a standard patrol formation." Lee nodded. 30 ships was still impossible odds, but it was better than facing the entire armada at once. "What's our tactical situation?" "We have advantages," Park said, bringing up a holographic display. "Their ships are bigger and more heavily armed, but we're faster and more maneuverable. Plus, we know this system better than they do." Chief Engineer Choi's voice came over the intercom from the engine room. "Captain, I'm pushing the fusion reactors to 110%. We'll have maximum power for the next 6 hours, but after that, I can't guarantee the containment fields will hold." "Understood. Chief, make it count." Lieutenant Kim looked up from his communication station. "Captain, I'm picking up alien transmissions. They're using a complex encoding system, but our computers are starting to break it down." "Good work. Kim, let me know the moment you have anything useful." The bridge fell quiet as they approached the battle zone. Lee could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew this was their first and probably last real fight. The outcome would determine whether humanity's evacuation fleet escaped or was hunted down and destroyed. "Contact," Park shouted. 30 Vorthak ships bearing 27 Mark IV. "They've seen us and are changing course to intercept." Lee settled into his command chair. "All hands battle stations. This is not a drill. Weapons free." The Indomitable's massive guns swiveled toward the approaching enemy fleet. The ship's main batteries consisted of 12 heavy plasma cannons and 40 smaller pulse laser turrets. Against 30 enemy ships, every shot would need to count. "Range 2 million kilometers and closing," Park reported. "They're spreading out into attack formation." "Wait until they're closer," Lee ordered. "Let them think they have us." The Vorthak ships were sleek and angular, painted in dark colors that made them hard to see against the blackness of space. Each one was nearly as large as the Indomitable, but Lee had studied their design. They were built for overwhelming firepower, not for speed or flexibility. 1 million kilometers, Park announced. They're targeting us with their main guns. Evasive maneuvers, Lee commanded. Pattern Delta 7. The Indomitable suddenly rolled to starboard and dove toward the orbital plane of Jupiter. The first Vorthak energy beams passed harmlessly through the space where they had been seconds before. Now, Lee shouted. All guns fire! The Indomitable's weapons lit up the darkness as they unleashed their fury on the enemy fleet. The ship's main plasma cannons sent bolts of superheated energy racing across space, while the smaller turrets filled the void with deadly laser fire. 2 Vorthak ships exploded immediately, their hulls torn apart by the concentrated firepower. A third ship lost its main engines and began spinning out of control, venting atmosphere and debris. Direct hits on 3 targets, Park reported with excitement. But the others are closing fast. Impact in 30 seconds. Take us into the asteroid field, Lee ordered. Use the rocks for cover. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was dense with floating debris, some pieces as large as mountains. The Indomitable plunged into the field, using its superior maneuverability to weave between the massive rocks, while the Vorthak ship struggled to follow. They're having trouble with the asteroids, Kim reported from his station. Their ships are too big to navigate safely. Lee smiled grimly. That's what I was counting on. Park, can you target their lead ship? I have a clear shot, but only for a few seconds. Take it. The Indomitable spun around a huge asteroid and fired all weapons at once. The combined blast struck the lead Vorthak ship squarely in its command section. The alien vessel's shields flared and failed, and secondary explosions rippled along its hull. But the enemy was learning. The remaining ships spread out and began firing at the asteroids themselves, breaking them apart to clear a path. Clever, Park muttered. They're destroying our cover. Then we don't stay in one place, Lee replied. Take us deeper into the field. Head for the big cluster near the Jupiter-Mars gravity well. For the next 2 hours, the Indomitable played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Vorthak ships. They would dart out from behind an asteroid, fire everything they had, then disappear again before the enemy could return fire effectively. Dr. Song's voice came over the intercom from the medical bay. Captain, I have 18 wounded so far. Nothing critical, but if this keeps up... Understood, Doctor. Do what you can. Kim suddenly looked up from his station, his face pale. Captain, I've broken their communication code. The main Vorthak fleet is accelerating. They'll be here in 14 hours instead of 16. Lee felt his stomach drop. They were losing precious time. How many ships in the main fleet? 180, sir. And their flagship is massive. It's 3 times the size of anything we've seen before. Park had been listening while coordinating the ship's weapons. Captain, we've destroyed 12 enemy ships, but we're taking damage. Hull breaches on deck 7 and 11, and our main reactor is showing stress fractures. Choi's voice crackled over the intercom. I can keep her running, but we're burning through our reserves fast. At this rate, we'll be dead in space within 4 hours. Lee thought quickly. They had hurt the enemy, but not enough. The remaining 18 Vorthak ships were adapting to their tactics, and the main fleet was coming faster than expected. New plan, he announced. We're going to ram one of their ships. The bridge fell silent. Park stared at him in shock. Sir, that's suicide. Not ram and die, Lee clarified. Ram and board. Their ships are bigger than ours, which means they have weak spots. If we can get inside one of them... Park's eyes lit up with understanding. We could sabotage their communication system. Stop them from coordinating with the main fleet. Exactly. Kim, I need you to identify which ship is their command vessel. Kim worked frantically at his console. The ship at bearing 18 Mark 9. He's been broadcasting the most signals. That's our target, Lee decided. All hands prepare for boarding action. Marines to the airlocks. Everyone else brace for impact. The Indomitable charged out of the asteroid field directly at the Vorthak command ship. The alien vessel tried to turn away, but the human ship was too fast and too close. Impact in 10 seconds, Park warned. All power to forward shields, Lee commanded. The 2 ships collided with tremendous force. The Indomitable's reinforced prow smashed through the Vorthak vessel's hull, penetrating deep into its interior. Emergency lights flashed as both ships shuddered from the impact. Boarding parties away, Lee shouted into his communicator. Take their bridge and destroy their communications. Through the view screen, Lee could see human Marines in spacesuits leaping across the gap between ships, their weapons ready. The Vorthak had not expected such a desperate tactic, and their response was slow and confused. For 20 minutes, fierce fighting raged inside the alien ship. Then Kim's voice came over the radio from the boarding party. "Captain, we've taken their command center. Their communication array is destroyed, and we've downloaded their tactical data, but we can't hold this position much longer. Get back to the ship now," Lee ordered. The boarding parties fought their way back to the Indomitable as the Vorthak ship began to explode around them. The human ship pulled away just as the alien vessel's reactor went critical, adding another victory to their growing tally. But Lee knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. The main Vorthak fleet was getting closer, and his ship was running out of time. They had bought humanity a few precious hours, but the real battle was still to come. "Status report," he called out. 14 enemy ships destroyed, Park reported. 16 still active, but they're regrouping. And, Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the edge of the system. The main fleet will be here soon. Lee looked at the tactical display, watching as red dots representing enemy ships began to multiply. Soon the Indomitable would face impossible odds. But they had proven something important today. Humans could fight. Humans could win. And humans would never give up no matter how dark things looked. "All stations, prepare for the main engagement," he announced. "And remember, every minute we keep fighting is another minute for our people to escape." The main Vorthak fleet arrived like a plague of metal locusts against the starfield. Captain Lee Hyun watched from the bridge of the Indomitable as over 180 enemy ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. At their center was the massive flagship Devourer, a ship so large it looked like a floating city. "My God," whispered Commander Park Mina from her tactical station. "That flagship is 5 kilometers long. And it's heading straight for us," added Lieutenant Kim from Communications. "The entire fleet is spreading out in attack formation. They're not taking any chances this time." Lee studied the tactical display, his mind racing. 3 days of hit-and-run attacks had cost the enemy 34 ships, but his own vessel was badly damaged. Hull breaches scarred the Indomitable's armor, and several weapon systems were offline. Worse, they were running low on ammunition and fuel. "Chief Choi, how are we holding up?" Lee asked over the intercom. The engineer's voice was strained with exhaustion. "Captain, we're running on backup power for half the ship. Main reactor is at 60% efficiency, and I've got coolant leaks in 3 sections. We can maybe manage another 6 hours of combat operations." Dr. Song's voice joined the conversation from the medical bay. "Captain, I have 47 wounded crew members. 15 are critical. We've lost 32 people so far, including Lieutenant Commander Wells and Chief Petty Officer Yoon." Lee closed his eyes briefly. Wells had been his friend for 8 years. Yoon had served on the ship since its launch. Good people, all of them, dying far from home. "How much time do we need to buy?" he asked Kim. "Evacuation fleet reports they're at 91% loaded," Kim replied, checking his console. "They need another 4 hours to complete the evacuation and jump to hyperspace." 4 hours. Against 180 ships, with half his crew dead or wounded. "Sir," Park said quietly, "I've been running tactical simulations. Even if we fight perfectly, we can't last more than 2 hours against that fleet." Lee nodded grimly. He had come to the same conclusion. "Then we need to hurt them badly in those 2 hours. Make them think twice about chasing our evacuation ships." The Vorthak fleet was spreading out now, surrounding the Indomitable in a massive sphere of firepower. Lee could see their strategy clearly. They planned to overwhelm his ship with concentrated fire from all directions, giving him no room to maneuver. "All hands, this is the captain," Lee announced over the ship's intercom. "The enemy main fleet has arrived. We're outnumbered 90-1, and they have us surrounded. In a few minutes, they're going to throw everything they have at us." He paused, listening to the quiet sounds of his crew preparing for battle. "I want you all to know that what we've accomplished here will be remembered forever. We've already bought our people 3 extra days to evacuate. Every person who escapes because of our sacrifice will carry our story to the stars." Park looked up from her console. "Captain, they're hailing us. Put it on screen." The main view screen flickered, showing the bridge of the Vorthak flagship. The alien commander was tall and thin, with gray skin and black eyes that seemed to absorb light. When it spoke, its voice was translated by the ship's computer into cold mechanical words. "Human vessel. This is Fleet Commander Kethrak of the Vorthak Empire. You have fought bravely, but your situation is hopeless. Surrender now and your crew will be given honorable captivity." Lee stepped forward, looking directly at the alien commander. "This is Captain Lee Hyun of the Terran battleship Indomitable. I have a counteroffer for you, Commander. Turn your fleet around and leave this system. and we won't destroy any more of your ships." The alien's head tilted slightly, an expression that might have been confusion or amusement. "Captain, you are one ship against 180. Your weapons are nearly depleted. Your hull is breached in multiple locations and half your crew is dead. What possible threat could you pose?" Lee smiled coldly. "You've been fighting us for 3 days, Commander." "How many ships have you lost?" 34 vessels, the alien admitted. "And how many ships have we lost?" The alien paused. "You have lost none." "That's right. 0. We're still here, still fighting, and we're not going anywhere. So I'll ask you again. Are you sure you want to find out what we're capable of when we're truly desperate?" The transmission ended abruptly. Lee turned back to his crew, who were staring at him with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Sir," Park said quietly, "that was either brilliant psychology or complete insanity." "Probably both," Lee admitted. "Now let's see if we can back up my big words. What's our tactical situation?" Park brought up the battle display. "They're forming 3 attack waves. First wave will hit us in 5 minutes with concentrated fire from 60 ships. If we survive that, the second wave will close to point-blank range while the third wave flanks us. Recommendations? We can't fight them conventionally. Our only chance is to do something they don't expect." Lee studied the tactical display, looking for any advantage they could exploit. Then he saw it. The Vorthak formation was tight and disciplined, but it had a weakness. "Park, can you target their flagship's main engines with our remaining nuclear torpedoes?" "Yes, but the range is extreme. I'd need to fire all 6 torpedoes at once to have any chance of penetrating their shields." "Do it. And time the launch for the exact moment their first wave opens fire." "Sir, if we launch our torpedoes at their flagship, we won't have any heavy weapons left for the attack waves." "I know. But if we can damage their command ship, it might disrupt their coordination." The first wave of Vorthak ships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with deadly energy beams. The Indomitable rolled and dove, using every trick Lee had learned in 20 years of combat. But there were too many enemies shooting from too many directions. Direct hit on Deck 12. Park shouted over the noise of alarms. "Hull breach on Deck 15. We're losing atmosphere in 3 sections. Fire the torpedoes now," Lee commanded. 6 nuclear torpedoes streaked across space toward the massive Vorthak flagship. The alien ship's defensive systems tried to intercept them, but the weapons were too fast and too close together. 5 torpedoes were destroyed, but the 6th penetrated the flagship's shields and detonated against its main engine cluster. The explosion was visible even at their distance, a brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the nearby stars. The Devourer lurched to one side, trailing debris and plasma. "Direct hit," Kim reported excitedly. "Their flagship is damaged. I'm reading massive power fluctuations. But their success came at a cost." The first wave's attack had savaged the Indomitable. Lee could feel the deck shaking under his feet as emergency teams rushed to seal hull breaches. "Casualties?" he asked Dr. Song over the intercom. 23 dead, 31 wounded, she reported. "Captain, we can't take many more hits like that." The second wave was already moving in, 60 more ships closing to point-blank range. Lee knew this was probably the end. His ship was too damaged to survive another concentrated attack. "Chief Choi," he called to engineering, "how much power do we have left in the main reactor?" "About 40%, Captain. Why?" Lee looked at Park. "Can we overload the reactor? Turn it into a weapon?" Park's eyes widened with understanding. "Yes, but the explosion would destroy us too." "How big would the blast be? Fusion overload at this size?" "It would take out everything within 50 kilometers." Lee nodded slowly. It was their last card to play. If they were going to die anyway, they might as well take as many enemies with them as possible. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced. "Prepare to abandon ship. All escape pods are to launch immediately. That's an order." "Sir," Park protested, "the escape pods won't survive in this battle zone." "They have a better chance than staying here," Lee replied. "Besides, someone needs to tell our story." Kim looked up from his station. "Captain, I'm not leaving." "Neither are most of the crew. They're refusing to abandon ship." Lee felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. His people were choosing to stay with him to the end. "In that case," he said quietly, "let's make this count. Chief Choi, begin reactor overload procedures. We're going to ram the flagship." The Indomitable turned toward the massive Vorthak command ship, its engines straining to build up speed. Around them, enemy ships closed in for the kill, unaware that their prey had just become the most dangerous thing in the solar system. Lee gripped his command chair as the ship accelerated toward its final target. In a few minutes it would all be over. But humanity would remember the Indomitable's last stand, and that memory would carry them to the stars. The Indomitable raced toward the massive Vorthak flagship like a missile aimed at the heart of the enemy fleet. Captain Lee Hyun stood on his damaged bridge, watching the distance close on the main view screen. Around them, alien ships fired desperately, trying to stop the human battleship's final charge. Reactor overload at 30%, Chief Engineer Choi reported from the engine room. His voice was calm despite knowing he was preparing his own death. Estimate 4 minutes until critical mass. Commander Park Mina worked frantically at her tactical station, her face pale but determined. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups on the enemy flagship. They're charging some kind of super weapon. Let them, Lee replied grimly. We'll reach them before they can fire. The bridge shook violently as another enemy blast struck their hull. Sparks flew from damaged control panels and the lights flickered. Through the smoke and chaos, Lee could see his remaining crew members at their stations, each one choosing to stay until the end. Lieutenant Kim looked up from his communications console, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Captain, the evacuation fleet is requesting an update. They're at 96% loaded but want to know if they should jump early. Tell them to complete the evacuation, Lee ordered. Every life matters. We'll buy them the time they need. Dr. Song's voice came over the intercom, strained with exhaustion. Captain, I've lost contact with Deck 7. The hull breach there is too severe, and we have fires on 3 more levels. Lee nodded sadly. His ship was dying around him, but she was still fighting. How many crew members do we have left? 97, sir. Out of the original 300. 97 souls, all choosing to stay with their ship rather than abandon their mission. Lee felt his throat tighten with emotion. These were the best people humanity had to offer, and in a few minutes they would all be gone. 2 minutes to fusion overload, Choi announced. The reactor containment is failing. We're past the point of no return. The Vorthak flagship loomed larger on the screen now, so massive it filled their entire view. Lee could see weapons ports opening along its hull like the eyes of some giant predator. But they were too close now for the alien ship to bring its main guns to bear. Incoming transmission from the enemy flagship, Kim reported. Put it through. Fleet Commander Kethrak appeared on the screen again, but this time his composed expression had been replaced by something that might have been respect. Captain Lee Hyun, your ship is destroyed. Your reactor is overloading. Why do you continue this futile gesture? Lee stepped closer to the screen. Because someone has to. Because if we don't fight, no one else will. Because this is what humans do when our backs are against the wall. You are going to die for nothing, the alien commander said. Your evacuation fleet will be hunted down. Your species will be enslaved. Your sacrifice changes nothing. Maybe, Lee admitted, but maybe not. You see, Commander, you made one mistake. You assumed humans would surrender when faced with impossible odds. You thought we would give up when the fight became hopeless. But that's not who we are. He paused, looking around at his crew. Park was still calculating firing solutions even though their weapons were destroyed. Kim was broadcasting their final position to the evacuation fleet. Dr. Song was treating wounded crew members who would die in minutes anyway. They were all still doing their jobs, still fighting because that was what humans did. We don't know how to quit, Lee continued. We don't know how to give up. And we sure as hell don't know how to surrender. So you can kill us, Commander, but you can't break us. And every species in this galaxy is going to learn what happened here. They're going to know that humans fought a fleet of 200 ships with one battleship and nearly won. The alien commander's expression was unreadable. Nearly won? Captain, you are about to die. Lee smiled coldly. Am I? Check your tactical display, Commander. How many ships have you lost? How many of your warriors will never see home again? You came here to destroy Earth quickly and easily. Instead, you've been fighting for days against one ship. Your own fleet knows you can't control us. The transmission cut off abruptly, but Lee could see the truth in the alien's reaction. The Vorthak had expected an easy victory, not a costly war of attrition. Even if they won today, word would spread to other alien species. Humans were not easy prey. 1 minute to reactor overload, Choi announced. All systems are failing. We're running on emergency power only. Suddenly, the ship shuddered as something struck the hull with tremendous force. The lights went out completely, leaving them in darkness except for the emergency lighting. Boarding parties, Park shouted. They're trying to capture the ship before we can ram them. Lee drew his sidearm. All remaining crew, repel boarders. Don't let them reach the engine room. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors as human and alien forces clashed in the damaged ship's passageways. Lee could hear the distinctive whine of Vorthak energy weapons mixing with the sharp crack of human projectile guns. Kim was still at his station, trying to maintain contact with the evacuation fleet. Captain, the transports are jumping to hyperspace now. Evacuation is complete. They got away. Lee felt a moment of pure relief. Whatever happened next, humanity would survive. The children and civilians were safe, far from this battle zone. Their mission was complete. 30 seconds to reactor overload. Choi's voice was barely audible over the noise of battle. Containment field is collapsing. The explosion will be spectacular. Through the bridge doors, Lee could see alien soldiers fighting their way toward them. The Vorthak were desperate to stop the reactor overload, but it was too late. The ship's fusion core was beyond any hope of control. Park looked up from her ruined console. Captain, it's been an honor serving with you. The honor was mine, Lee replied. He activated the ship's internal communications one last time. All hands, this is Captain Lee Hyun. In 10 seconds, the Indomitable will complete her final mission. We came here to buy time for humanity's evacuation, and we succeeded. The transport fleet is safe. Our people will live on among the stars, and they will remember what we did here. The bridge doors burst open as Vorthak soldiers rushed in, their weapons raised. But they were too late, tell them, Lee said, looking directly at the lead alien soldier. Tell them that humans don't surrender. The reactor containment field collapsed. The explosion began deep in the ship's core, a runaway fusion reaction that consumed matter and converted it to pure energy. The blast expanded outward at a significant fraction of light speed, vaporizing the Indomitable's hull in microseconds. The light was visible from Mars. A new star briefly appeared in the solar system as the fusion explosion reached its peak, brighter than the sun for those few seconds. When the light faded, both the Indomitable and the Vorthak flagship Devourer were gone, along with 46 other alien ships that had been too close to the blast. But the destruction of the flagship had a greater impact than just the loss of ships. The Vorthak fleet's command structure collapsed without their leader. Some ships tried to continue the pursuit of the evacuation fleet, but without coordination they were easily avoided. Others retreated to regroup, giving humanity precious time to establish defenses in their new home. Fleet Commander Kethrak's final transmission was picked up by long-range sensors throughout the galaxy. His last words, spoken in the moments before the explosion, would be remembered by many species. These humans, they are not like others. They do not fear death. They fear only failure to protect their own. The Battle of Sol was over. Humanity had lost their homeworld, but they had gained something more valuable: respect. Word of the Indomitable's last stand spread throughout the galaxy, carried by traders and diplomats to every civilized world. And in the distant Proxima system, refugee ships carrying the survivors of Earth began the long work of building a new civilization, one that would honor the memory of Captain Lee Hyun and his crew, by never forgetting that sometimes the greatest victory comes from refusing to surrender, even when victory seems impossible. The explosion of the Indomitable lit up the solar system like a second sun. On the bridge of the evacuation ship New Hope, Admiral Chen watched the massive blast through the viewscreen, his weathered face grim with both sorrow and pride. Captain Lee Hyun's final transmission is complete. Sir, reported his communications officer, the data package includes tactical information, battle recordings, and personal messages from the crew. Chen nodded slowly. Broadcast it to all ships in the fleet. Make sure every person who escaped Earth knows what those brave souls did for us. Across the refugee fleet, millions of survivors watched the recordings from the Indomitable's final battle. They saw Captain Lee standing on his damaged bridge, calm and determined even as death approached. They heard his last words to the alien commander, defiant to the end. And they witnessed the moment when one human ship faced impossible odds and chose to fight rather than surrender. In the cargo hold of the transport ship Horizon, 10-year-old Yoon Min watched the recordings with tears streaming down her face. Her father had been Chief Petty Officer Yoon, one of the first to die aboard the Indomitable. But now she understood that his death had meaning. He had died so she could live. The Vorthak fleet, what remained of it, retreated from the solar system in disorder. Without their flagship and supreme commander, The alien ships struggled to maintain formation. Some tried to pursue the human evacuation fleet, but without proper coordination, they were easily evaded by the faster human ships. On the surviving Vorthak command ship, Sub-Commander Vexith stared at the tactical display showing the destruction of 47 ships, including the mighty Devourer. In 3 days of fighting, one human vessel had cost them nearly a quarter of their fleet. "What are your orders, sir?" asked his tactical officer. Vexith was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Signal the remaining fleet. We return to Vorthak space. This campaign is over. Sir, the High Council expects us to pursue the human survivors." "The High Council did not see what I have seen," Vexith replied. "These humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They do not break under pressure. They do not surrender when defeat is certain. We came here expecting to crush a weak civilization, but instead we found warriors who would rather die than yield." He turned away from the tactical display. "Send a full report to the High Council. Include everything. The human tactics, their refusal to surrender, the destruction of our flagship. Let them decide if they want to continue this war against such an enemy." The Proxima Centauri system became humanity's new home. The refugee fleet, carrying over 800 million survivors, established colonies on 3 different worlds. It was hard work, building civilization from scratch, but the memory of the Indomitable gave them strength. On New Terra, the largest of the human colonies, they built a monument to Captain Lee Hyun and his crew. The memorial was simple, a black granite wall with 300 names carved into it, and beneath them, Lee's final words to the Vorthak commander: "Tell them that humans don't surrender." Every year on the anniversary of the Battle of Sol, people from across the human colonies would gather at the memorial to remember the sacrifice that saved their species. Children who had never seen Earth would place flowers at the base of the wall and listen to their grandparents tell stories of the ship that fought until its last breath. But the impact of the Indomitable's sacrifice went far beyond humanity. The battle recordings, recovered from the ship's data core that had been ejected before the final explosion, spread throughout the galaxy. Alien traders carried copies to distant worlds, and soon every spacefaring civilization had heard the story. On the Kalari homeworld, the Council of Voices discussed the human battle for days. They had been considering submission to Vorthak demands for tribute, but the recordings changed their minds. If one human ship could inflict such damage on the mighty Vorthak fleet, perhaps resistance was possible after all. The Zelani Federation, long oppressed by Vorthak expansion, began secretly developing new weapons and tactics based on human fighting techniques. They studied every move the Indomitable had made, learning how a smaller, weaker force could hurt a much larger enemy through clever maneuvering and desperate courage. Even among the Vorthak themselves, the battle became a subject of intense debate. Some commanders argued that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to survive and called for a massive fleet to hunt down the refugees. But others, like Sub-Commander Vexith, argued that such an effort would be too costly and might inspire other species to resist. 50 years after the Battle of Sol, humanity had grown strong again. The colonies in the Proxima system now supported over 2 billion people, and human ships once again traveled between the stars. These new vessels bore names like Indomitable, Lee Hyun, and Defiance, honoring the memory of those who had died to give humanity a future. Captain Park Jin, grandson of Commander Park Mina, stood on the bridge of the new battleship Indomitable II, reading the mission briefing that had just arrived from Colonial Command. The Kalari Federation had formally requested human assistance in their war against Vorthak expansion. It would be humanity's first major military action since the evacuation from Earth. "What are your orders, Captain?" asked his tactical officer. Park looked at the photograph mounted near his command chair. It showed the original Indomitable's crew, taken just before their final mission. His grandmother stood beside Captain Lee, both of them young and determined, unaware they were about to become legends. "Set course for the Kalari system," Park ordered, "and send a message to Colonial Command. Tell them that humanity remembers its debts. The species that stood with us in our darkest hour will not stand alone in theirs." As the new Indomitable jumped into hyperspace, its crew carried with them the memory of their predecessor's sacrifice. They knew that sometime soon, they too might be called upon to make the ultimate choice between survival and honor. And when that moment came, they would remember the lesson taught by Captain Lee Hyun and his crew, that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from living, but from choosing how to die. In the years that followed, the name Indomitable became known throughout the galaxy. It represented more than just a ship or a battle. It became a symbol of the human spirit, the refusal to yield in the face of impossible odds, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you love. Other species began to adopt human tactics and human values. They learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. They discovered that a small force fighting for something larger than itself could defeat enemies many times its size. The Vorthak Empire, once seemingly unstoppable, found itself facing resistance on multiple fronts. Species that had never worked together before began forming alliances, inspired by the example of humans who had died rather than surrender. The Empire's expansion slowed, then stopped, and finally began to reverse as more and more worlds chose to fight rather than submit. And in the Proxima system, children still gathered at the memorial to hear the story of the Indomitable. They learned about Captain Lee Hyun, who chose duty over safety, about Commander Park Mina, who calculated the odds of victory and fought anyway, about Lieutenant Kim Tae, who stayed at his post even as the ship burned around him, about Chief Engineer Choi Bin, who gave his life to keep the ship fighting just a little longer, about Dr. Song Hae, who cared for the wounded until the very end. These children would grow up to become the leaders of humanity's new age, and they would carry with them the knowledge that no enemy was too strong, no odds too great, if people were willing to stand together and fight for what mattered most. The Battle of Seoul was over, but its legacy lived on. In every human heart that refused to surrender, in every alliance formed against tyranny, in every small ship that dared to challenge a larger fleet. The Indomitable and her crew had given humanity more than just time to escape. They had given them a future worth fighting for, and the courage to defend it. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, in the debris field where Earth's solar system once knew peace, the atoms that had once been the battleship Indomitable continued their journey among the stars, carrying with them the memory of 300 souls who chose honor over life, and in doing so, gave life meaning for all who came after.